In 1987, former librarian William Bryan Cruse was notorious in his neighborhood for being the residential grumpy old man. He had a bad temper, routinely yelling at neighborhood kids. Known to scare people with his rifle, his neighbors thought he was dangerous and avoided him at all costs. Though there were signs of William's descent into madness, including an incident that would foreshadow the events to come, they never could have imagined that Cruse would go on a barbaric shooting spree that would leave 6 dead and 14 others injured. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe. I'm the host, and thank you for joining today. A lot to go in today, so I'm not going to ramble on. But before we get going with the story today, this is your official reminder to subscribe wherever you'd like to listen to podcasts. Probably where you're listening right now. If you're not already subscribed, please do that. If you know someone that is into stories that are brief in nature, that are about murders, true crime in general, let them know about 10-Minute Murder. I'd appreciate that. And you can connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links are in the show notes of this episode, as well as at 10minutemurder.com. Now to the story. William Bryan Cruse was born on November 21st, 1927 in Irvine, a small town southeast of Lexington, Kentucky. During his time as a high school student, his classmates described him as quiet and well-behaved. He was known to keep to himself, didn't participate in any sports, and he rarely attended any of the high school dances. His home life, however, was anything but quiet. William's father, W.B. Cruse, was a raging alcoholic. He owned 2 bars where frequent fights were known to break out. And in 1949, he went on a shooting spree, spraying bullets inside an empty home of a Commonwealth attorney, and W.B. was sentenced to 5 years in the state prison and LaGrange Reformatory. Decades later, William would appallingly follow in his father's footsteps and go on a shooting spree of his own. Only this time, 6 people would wind up dead. Young William eventually went on to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree in history in 1951 and a master's in library science in 1954 at the University of Kentucky. He worked for the Cincinnati Public Library from 1955 to 1967 and was listed in the Lexington City Directory from 1972 to 1983. 2 years before the shooting spree, William and his wife, Millie, would move to Palm Bay, Florida from Kentucky. When neighbors asked the couple about their Kentucky license plates, William told them about a farm his grandfather had owned in Kentucky, but offered very little details about his actual past. This is something neighbors would grow used to. For the most part, the couple would keep to themselves. Now, in his late 50s, William's shushing days were over. He was a retired librarian with thinning gray hair, and the neighbors had reason to suspect that he had the potential to commit murder. What neighbors didn't know was that William was arrested in 1978 on a first-degree assault charge and in 1980 on public intoxication charges. The assault charge would eventually be reduced to 3rd degree, and he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. William had a history of volatile behavior and violence, repeating patterns he saw in his own childhood, and as he and his wife began to settle into their new home, people started to see a hostile side of their new neighbor. While their neighbors didn't know much about the life of the couple, they knew 2 things for certain. William's wife, Millie, was ill, and William detested when the neighborhood kids would cut through his yard, and he would use his guns to scare them. At this point, he was just the prototypical stay-off-my-lawn, grumpy old man, plus guns. He would scream at the children to get off his land, using foul language as he appeared at the door with a weapon in hand. The neighborhood kids would sometimes taunt him and pull pranks in retaliation, which only ignited his already very short temper. William became increasingly paranoid that the neighbors and children were gossiping about him and spreading rumors that he was a homosexual. While it seemed like the neighborhood children were William's main trigger, the adults in the neighborhood weren't safe from the berating. A 39-year-old construction worker said that William had aimed a rifle in his direction one evening after being dropped off across the street of a friend. Another man called the police after Cruse chased his 6-year-old son up the street, apparently making lewd and sexually suggestive remarks to the boy. An officer investigated the complaint, but no one followed up on the case. Even more alarming was one occasion where William did pull the trigger on his rifle and fired warning shots over a couple of teenagers' heads. There were complaints with the police, and eventually neighbors signed a petition stating that he was dangerous, but the police never intervened. Then, on April 23, 1987, after having a quiet dinner with his wife and putting away the dishes, William snapped after two teens cut across his yard. He went outside with his rifle and started shooting, hitting 14-year-old John Rich as he was playing basketball in his driveway across the street. John collapsed, but he was not fatally wounded. William then got into his white Toyota and sped away. He drove half a mile to the Palm Bay shopping center and started shooting anything and everybody in his way. He had his rifle, one revolver, and a satchel full of ammunition. Horrified shoppers ran out the back of stores, while others dropped to the ground in terror. When William Cruse got back into his car, he drove across the road and opened fire in a parking lot. 28-year-old Officer Gerald Johnson was first on the scene. He was only 1 year on the job, and as his squad car pulled up, William unleashed 8 shots into the windshield, killing him. 27-year-old Officer Ron Grogan was also pronounced dead after an exchange of bullets. Eventually, William stormed into a Winn-Dixie grocery store, firing as he entered and taking hostages. A few people hid in a walk-in freezer, while others were caught inside. During this time, nearly 200 policemen surrounded the store, while 4 SWAT teams moved into place. Police began negotiations with William, but he would not go easily. There was a 6-hour standoff until finally he let go of the hostages. When the police swarmed into the store, William tried to run but was wrestled to the ground and apprehended. William Bryan Cruse killed 6 people that horrible evening in April. Many others were left wounded. He was convicted of the 6 murders in 1989, resulting in 2 death sentences. Psychiatrists for the defense testified that William was a paranoid schizophrenic beset by delusions. William died on death row on November 29, 2009, of natural causes. Spree killings like this one are almost always the result of untreated or undiagnosed mental illness, but that fact does not alleviate William's responsibility or rationalize the tremendous loss of life. Among some of the victims were young engineering students from Kuwait and 2 police officers. During his years on death row, William Bryan Cruse never got any visitors. Even his wife at the time abandoned him. He died completely and utterly alone. The victims, on the other hand, remain remembered by the family and friends that loved them.